Look, Daddy, it is you and me.
It is beautiful. Thank you so much.
Dad's. Look, Dad, that's you and Mom and me.
It's beautiful, buddy. Thank you. See? You're better now.
Look, you're the man in the wheelchair. That's right. Thank you. Oh, how sweet.
The monitors beeped alone in that room for 6 straight days. No visitors. No calls. Not one member of his own family walked through that door after the doctors said the word terminal. Then, on the 7th night, while a nurse stepped away for less than 2 minutes, an alarm began screaming through that corridor, and the only person in that room to respond was a 4-year-old boy who was never even supposed to be in that wing at all. What he did in the 90 seconds before help arrived should not have been possible for a child his age. It left an entire medical team standing in stunned silence, and it left the dying billionaire's family with a truth they could never take back. Stay with me until the end, because this story will make you question everything you think you know about who actually shows up when it matters most. Before we go further, tell me quickly in the comments, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there right now? I love knowing who is with me on this journey. Please tap that like button, hit subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to believe that love arrives from the most unexpected places. Now, let me take you back to where this all began. His name was Griffin, a billionaire who had spent 4 decades building a shipping and logistics empire that stretched across 6 continents, a man whose name alone could move markets, yet who now lay in a private medical wing of his own Savannah state, connected to machines that measured a heartbeat growing weaker by the week. The diagnosis had come 8 months earlier, an aggressive form of heart failure combined with complications no specialist could fully untangle, each treatment attempted only to buy weeks rather than years. When the lead cardiologist finally used the word terminal during a family meeting that Griffin insisted on attending himself despite his failing strength, something in that room shifted permanently. His 2 adult children from his first marriage, Sterling and Vivian, had grown up wealthy, distant, and quietly resentful of a father who had always valued expansion over presence. The terminal diagnosis, rather than drawing them closer, seemed to trigger something colder in both of them, a shift from grief into calculation that Griffin recognized immediately, having built his entire empire by reading exactly that kind of shift in other people's eyes. Within 2 weeks of the diagnosis, Sterling and Vivian stopped visiting entirely, retreating instead into closed-door meetings with state lawyers, disputing terms of will that had not even been finalized yet, each one convinced the other intended to manipulate their dying father's final decisions in their own favor. The household staff, once numbering nearly 20, thinned steadily as well. Some left for better-paying positions elsewhere, unwilling to work in a house that had become, in the words of one departing chef, unbearably heavy with grief nobody was allowed to speak about directly. Others simply could not handle watching a man who had once commanded boardrooms full of powerful people now struggle to lift a water glass on his own. By the 6th day after that family meeting, only a skeleton staff remained, a night nurse, a day nurse, and a live-in housekeeper named Odessa, who had worked in that house for just over a year, and had nowhere else pressing enough to justify abandoning a dying man simply because his own children had. If this story is already touching something in you, comment below and tell me, have you ever watched someone abandoned by exactly the people who should have stayed closest? And please subscribe now, because what happens on that 7th night will leave you completely speechless. Odessa was 29 years old, a single mother raising her 4-year-old son, Caleb, entirely on her own since his father had disappeared before Caleb's first birthday. She had taken a live-in housekeeping position at Griffin's estate specifically because it included modest quarters for herself and Caleb, a rare arrangement that let her keep her son close while still earning enough to survive in a city where rent alone consumed most single incomes. For over a year, she kept a respectful, professional distance from Griffin, managing his household with quiet efficiency, rarely interacting with him beyond brief, polite exchanges in hallways. Griffin, absorbed in his empire and later in his declining health, had barely registered her presence beyond noting, occasionally, that the house ran smoothly in ways it never had under previous staff. That changed on the 6th night after the family meeting, though not by anyone's plan. Odessa's regular evening childcare arrangement, a neighbor who watched Caleb during her final household duties, fell through unexpectedly due to a family emergency of her own. With no backup plan and a full evening of tasks still ahead, Odessa made the difficult decision to bring Caleb with her, settling him in the small staff sitting room with toys and a coloring book, checking on him every few minutes between her duties, praying nobody in the family would notice or object. Nobody did notice, because nobody from the family was there to notice anything at all. What Odessa did not account for was Caleb's quiet, watchful curiosity, the kind that made him notice things adults assumed were beneath a 4-year-old's attention. Over the previous week, whenever his mother brought him along on brief errands through that wing of the house, Caleb had quietly observed the night nurse's routine every time she passed the sitting room. The way she checked the machines, the way she pressed a particular button on the wall, whenever something beeped in a certain rhythm, the way she always came running the instant a specific sound changed. Children remember far more than grown adults ever give them credit for. If you are still with me, comment below and tell me, do you believe children notice more than the adults around them realize? This story is about to take a turn you will not expect, so make sure you are subscribed before we continue. At just past 9 that evening, while Odessa was occupied refilling medical supplies in a linen closet down the hall, Caleb slipped out of the sitting room, drawn by the soft, rhythmic beeping sound echoing faintly from a partially closed door at the end of the corridor, a sound that, to his 4-year-old curiosity, might as well have been an invitation. He pushed the door open with both small hands and toddled into a room he had never been permitted near, dimly lit, filled with quietly humming machines and a thin, pale man lying in a bed far too large for how small he currently seemed within it. In his other hand, Caleb carried a folded piece of paper, one of several he'd been quietly making in the sitting room over recent evenings, covered in careful, uneven crayon writing his mother had been helping him sound out letter by letter. He climbed with considerable determined effort onto a chair beside the bed and simply sat there for a moment, studying Griffin's tired face with open, fearless curiosity, utterly unbothered by the tubes or the machines that made every adult visitor in recent weeks visibly uncomfortable. Griffin, drifting in the exhausted half-sleep that had become his primary state over recent days, opened his eyes slowly to find a small boy he did not recognize watching him. Before either of them could speak, the boy carefully unfolded his paper and held it up close enough for Griffin's tired eyes to focus on it. In careful, crooked crayon letters, it read simply, "God make you strong. We love you." Griffin stared at that small, uneven handwriting for a long moment, something tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with his failing cardiac function. Then, without warning, the monitor beside his bed began shrieking, a harsh, urgent alarm that filled the room as Griffin's oxygen mask, loosened during his restless sleep, slipped fully off his face. His breathing turned ragged, panicked, his hands too weak and too tangled in wires to fix it himself. The night nurse, who had stepped away for less than 2 minutes to answer an urgent call at the far end of the corridor, was too far to hear the alarm immediately over the sound of her own conversation. What Caleb did in the next 90 seconds was the part nobody in that house would ever forget. If this part of the story is moving you, please like this video right now and comment below, has a child ever done something that left you completely speechless? This story is not over, so make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next will show you exactly how far love can reach. Caleb did not run for help the way any reasonable adult would have expected a frightened 4-year-old to do. Instead, small hands moving with a steadiness that seemed to belong to someone far older, he reached out, found a fallen mask tangled in the sheets, and pressed it firmly back over Griffin's nose and mouth with both palms, holding it in place exactly the way he had watched the nurse do it days earlier, his young face set with fierce, unwavering concentration. Then, still holding the mask steady with one hand, he twisted around and began slamming his other small fist against the call button mounted on the bed rail, over and over, the same button he had quietly memorized from simply watching, refusing to stop even as the sound of running footsteps finally grew louder in the corridor outside. By the time the night nurse burst through that door, followed seconds later by the day nurse and Odessa herself, frantic after realizing Caleb had disappeared from the sitting room, they found a 4-year-old boy still kneeling on that chair, both hands now pressed firmly over an oxygen mask that had never come loose again, tears streaming down his face, refusing to let go until the nurse gently assured him it was safe to do so. Griffin, breathing steadier now, stared up at the small boy who had just done correctly, by pure instinct and quiet observation, exactly what a trained adult should have already been in that room to do. The nurse, checking his vitals with trembling hands, found something that made her call the attending physician immediately. Not out of alarm this time, but disbelief. Griffin's heart rhythm, badly destabilized just moments earlier, was already settling back into a pattern steadier than anything recorded in weeks. Odessa scooped Caleb into her arms, apologizing frantically, terrified this moment would cost her the job that kept them both housed and fed. Griffin, with more strength in his voice than he had managed in days, told her firmly to stop, that her son had just done something none of his own highly paid medical team had managed to do quickly enough that night. He asked quietly to keep the small folded paper still crumpled in Caleb's fist. If this story is moving you, please like this video right now and tell me in the comments, do you believe courage sometimes shows up in the smallest, most unexpected forms? Also, make sure you are subscribed because the most unforgettable part of this story is still ahead. That paper became the first of many. Over the following weeks, Caleb's visits turned into a quiet, unofficial ritual, always with Odessa nearby, always brief, always entirely on the boy's own unpredictable terms. Nearly every evening, he arrived with a new folded note, sounded out letter by letter with his mother's patient help, simple, misspelled, entirely sincere. You are brave. Jesus is with you. I prayed for your heart today. Griffin began keeping every single one, taping them in a growing collection along the wall beside his bed, until a plain medical room slowly filled with a 4-year-old's crooked handwriting and construction paper hearts, a wall of encouragement no specialist treatment plan had ever thought to prescribe. He found himself, for the first time in longer than he could remember, actually wanting to wake up each morning, curious what small, uneven message might be waiting for him. Curious what uncomplicated joy the day might bring rather than simply enduring the hours until his next medical appointment. His condition, against every clinical prediction, began slowly stabilizing. The specialists remained cautiously professional about attributing this shift anything beyond adjusted medication and unexpectedly favorable biology, but even they could not entirely dismiss the timing, nor explain away a chart of vitals that had turned a corner the same week a 4-year-old started leaving prayers taped to his wall. Sterling and Vivian, informed by the estate lawyers of their father's improving condition, returned to the house within days, not out of relief exactly, but out of sudden urgency, having spent the previous weeks assuming the estate transition was merely a matter of time. A recovering father complicated matters they had already begun quietly arranging between themselves. Their reaction to Caleb's presence in the house, once they learned the full story from the day nurse, was immediate and cold. Vivian, in particular, expressed sharp concern to the household attorney about an unsupervised child having such close, unmonitored access to their vulnerable father, hinting at liability concerns that sounded, to anyone actually paying attention, considerably more concerned with influence over Griffin's estate decisions than with any genuine safety issue. Sterling, meanwhile, quietly suggested to Griffin's personal assistant that perhaps Odessa's position should be reevaluated, citing professional boundary concerns that had never once been raised during the entire year she had managed a household without incident, prior to her son's dramatic late-night intervention. If you are still with me, comment below and tell me, have you ever watched people suddenly show concern only once something they wanted seemed threatened? This story is about to reach its most important turn, so make sure you are subscribed before we continue. Within a week of Sterling and Vivian's return, and without ever directly consulting Griffin himself while he was resting during a difficult afternoon, the household attorney, acting on the siblings' persistent concerns, informed Odessa that her position was being terminated, citing vague language about appropriate professional boundaries and unauthorized guests residing on the property. Odessa, understanding immediately what was actually happening beneath the formal language, did not argue with people who had clearly already decided the outcome before speaking with her. She packed her and Caleb's few belongings that same evening, heartbroken but unwilling to fight a battle against lawyers and grown children fighting over an inheritance she had never once cared about herself. She left a brief note for Griffin, uncertain if he would even see it given how carefully Sterling and Vivian now controlled who had access to their recovering father, simply thanking him for the years she had spent in that house, and telling him, honestly, that Caleb had talked about him every single day since that first night. Griffin did not learn the full truth of what had happened for nearly 3 days, kept deliberately uninformed by family members now managing his household affairs with newly restored enthusiasm now that his prognosis had improved enough to make the estate worth actively protecting rather than simply dividing. He noticed immediately that no new folded paper had appeared on his wall in days, and that absence alone told him something was deeply wrong before anyone confirmed it. When his personal physician mentioned, in passing, concern about Griffin's noticeably declining mood despite his continued physical stabilization, Griffin finally demanded answers directly from his own staff rather than accepting his children's careful management of information any longer. The truth, once he finally extracted it, filled him with a fury he had not felt in years. He confronted Sterling and Vivian directly, his restored strength evident in a voice that filled that room the way it once filled boardrooms across 6 continents, informing them, in no uncertain terms, that the woman and child who had done more for his actual survival than either of his own children had managed in 8 months of calculated absence had been discarded like unwanted staff the moment his recovery became inconvenient to their plans. If this part of the story is moving you, please like this video right now, and tell me in the comments, do you believe true love and loyalty reveal themselves most clearly during someone's darkest moments? This story is almost finished, so make sure you are subscribed for what comes next. Griffin found Odessa's new address through his own private investigator, driving there himself for the first time in nearly a year, his strength still fragile, but his determination undeniable, refusing any assistance despite his physician's cautious objections. When Odessa opened her door and saw him standing there, thinner still, but undeniably steadier than she had ever seen him, she froze, uncertain what to say. Griffin did not waste time with careful, formal language. He said, "My own children abandoned me the moment I stopped being convenient, and your son saved my life with his own 2 hands when nobody trained to do it was even in the room. I am sorry it took me 3 days to learn what was actually done to you both. Please come back. Not as staff, but because I finally understand what family is actually supposed to look like." Odessa studied his face for a long moment before finally saying, "Take me to him." Griffin blinked, confused, until she smiled softly and clarified, "Caleb has been asking about you every single day, and he has 3 more notes he has not gotten to deliver yet." The reunion in that Savannah house, when Odessa and Caleb returned, was quiet, filled with the sound of a small boy's delighted shriek and the immediate, familiar sight of a folded piece of paper pressed proudly into Griffin's hands the moment he was close enough to receive it. Months passed. Griffin's recovery continued steadily, aided, his doctors eventually admitted with grudging acknowledgement, by factors medicine alone could not fully explain. Sterling and Vivian, faced with their father's undeniable clarity about what they had done, found their relationship with him permanently altered. Their inheritance concerns replaced by uncomfortable distance neither seemed capable of repairing quickly. Odessa and Caleb moved back into that estate permanently, this time not as staff, but as a family Griffin had somehow found in the most unexpected way possible. The wall of folded notes beside his bed kept growing, eventually spreading across an entire section of that room, a testament nobody in that house would ever consider removing. One evening, nearly a year after that first unforgettable night, Griffin asked Odessa to join him in the garden after Caleb had finally fallen asleep. The Savannah sky was clear, stars scattered like scattered diamonds above quiet trees that had watched an entire family fall apart and slowly, painfully, rebuild itself into something unexpected. He took her hand gently and told her something he had been carrying for months but had been too afraid to say out loud. He said, "Your son held a mask to my face and pounded on a call button when grown adults trained for exactly that moment were not there to do it, and he's been holding my heart together with crayon and prayer ever since. I do not want you to be my housekeeper anymore. I want you and Caleb to be my family, officially, if you will let me love you both the way you have already given me a reason to live." Odessa stood there under that quiet sky, tears falling freely, unable to speak for a long moment. This man, whose own children had abandoned the moment he became inconvenient, was now offering her and her son his whole heart, his whole restored future. She said yes. The small ceremony they held took place right there in that garden, Caleb, now 5 years old, presenting Griffin with one final folded note as part of the ceremony itself, this one reading, in slightly steadier handwriting than his very first, "You are my dad now, too." as Odessa stood there that evening, surrounded by a man the whole world had once written off as beyond saving and a son who had never once doubted otherwise. She understood something simple but powerful. Sometimes the people who save us are not the ones with the most training or the most resources, but the ones brave enough to act without hesitation and patient enough to keep believing one folded prayer at a time when everyone else has already walked away. If this story touched your heart today, you already know what to do. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share with someone who needs to believe that love shows up exactly when we need it most, even from the smallest, most unexpected places. Tell me in the comments which moment moved you the most, the mask and the call button, the wall of prayer notes, or the quiet proposal under the stars. I read every single comment, and I want to hear your heart on this one. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Until the next story, keep believing that sometimes the smallest hands do the bravest things, and I will see you very soon.